Welcome, everybody. I'm Chip Rogers, President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with us today, and we're going to bring you a really interesting show. I am so excited about the leaders that we have on today's program to talk about where our industry's been, where we are now, and most importantly, where are we going? And if you asked me uh, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, whenever, who would I like to have on a panel to talk about where the industry is headed, to really get into the numbers? I could not have come up with a group of experts better than the one we have today. So this is a real treat, and I hope we're going to enjoy it. Now, look, here we are, 2021. Got a new year, new hope. Vaccinations have started rolling out. There's a lot of good things happening, but for our industry, we're still probably at the depth of where we're going to be during this pandemic. We at least hope that this is the bottom. It doesn't get any worse. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But today, we're happy that you're here with us. If we could go to the next slide, I want to thank the sponsors. I know I mention this every time, and for those who watch all the time, without these sponsors, these things don't happen. And one of the things we're talking a lot about today is the State of the Industry report that AHLA just released. This is the first time we've done it. And what we felt that we should really do to explain kind of where the industry is to go out and find the best of the best. And you can see it right here on your screen. These are the folks that make a difference. Not only are they with us today, not only are they the leading experts, but as you can see, they financially support our association and by extension, our entire industry. And we want to thank them for that, because financial support at a time like this in this particular industry is hard to come by. And those who are willing to do it deserve our praise, deserve our recognition, and our long-term thanks for what they've done. All right, so last week we had a forum series that featured two of the biggest names in the travel industry, with Mark Hoplamazian from Hyatt, who also happens to be the chair of AHLA this year, and Robert Isom, of course, the president of American Airlines. And I hope you were part of that engaging conversation as we looked from the very top about two leaders in two distinct industries that come together for travel, about where they think we're headed. And that was a really interesting conversation. Today, though, we're really going to get into the numbers. If we could go to the next slide, I want to talk about some of the numbers that are coming out of our State of the Industry report. And this is available to all AHLA members, so please take advantage of this. We put a lot of effort into it, and the report is outstanding. You're going to hear our panelists talk more about it today. But here are some of the key takeaways, and there are dozens and dozens of them in the report. First and foremost, business travel. I get this question a lot, and it's on a lot of people's minds. When is it going to return? Well, if you're talking return in the form of 2019, that's not going to happen in business travel probably until 2023. So a long road ahead of us. What's on the mind of consumers? I think this one's really interesting. You know, I hear so many stories about people who are unable to see friends and family because of COVID-19. That is heartbreaking in many ways, but it is also a signal about the pent-up demand, and we see it here with 51% of consumers saying they're likely to travel for a wedding or family reunion this year. That's an enormous number. So that really talks about the pent-up demand. What's on consumers' minds with respect to hotels and safety? Because at the end of the day, that's really what's holding us back, and that is people who don't feel safe traveling. Well, they're telling us the number two item of concerns about a hotel is cleaning and safety. Number one is location, by the way. You want to go somewhere for that wedding or family reunion that is near where your family is, clearly. But number two is cleaning and safety, which is why safe stay is so important. And then another number that kind of jumped out of this on this report was 2/3 of people saying they want to hear more about cleaning and safety. You know, it's interesting. I hear from a lot of folks who run hotels on a daily basis, and prior to the pandemic, cleaning and safety took place in the dark of night, in the middle of the night when people weren't around. Now it's interesting. A lot of that cleaning and safety precaution measures are done by design, where consumers can see that happening, because this is really what consumers do want to see happening in our industry. So that's a lot about what is happening on that report. Please make sure you take advantage of that. Now I want to go to our panelists and bring them in. And again, I'm so excited to have this group with us. We're going to do something a little different that we don't typically do on our forum. We're going to let each of our experts have 2 minutes to tell us about something that's going on in their organization, what they're seeing as they head into 2021. And I want them to tell us what they're excited about in 2021. We've had about 11 months of things that are troubling, almost things that can get you depressed. I want to hear from folks about what they're excited about for 2021. Let's start. If we could get everybody up on the screen there, we'll go to my dear friend who happens to be the vice chair of AHLA this year, has been on our officer group and our board and executive committee for quite some time. He's the president and CEO of AHLA Hospitality. Justin Knight, please tell us what you're looking forward to in 2021.
Thanks, Chip. And I think after 2020, there's a lot to look forward to. But my name is Justin Knight. I'm the CEO of AHLA Hospitality. Our company owns 234 hotels, broadly diversified across the United States. Our hotels are, nearly entirely under the Hilton, Marriott, or Hyatt flags. Our hotels are largely select service hotels, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, as we kind of progress, because it gives us a little bit of a unique perspective on things. And our hotels are managed by 20 different management companies, or just under 20. As we look to the future or look to this coming year, I think I'm most excited that we're finally in a position where we can kind of begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel. There were times during 2020 where we were headed in a very negative direction. And I think as we moved into the summer months, things got a little bit better with the vaccine rollout and with a number of other things. I'm excited to see people travel again. And then on a personal level, I'm ready to go to a concert again. I'm a big fan of live music, and it's been way too long. So before the year's out, it's my goal to get to at least one and hopefully more than one concert.
Amen to that. Way back on my birthday, and I'm not asking for birthday gifts here or anything, which was way back in May. My wife got me tickets to see my favorite artist, a gentleman by the name of Johnny Lang, and it was scheduled for December. And of course, it got canceled. I had to wait that long just to get canceled, but they'll have the show again. So I'm with you, Justin. Let's do live music again. Next up, this gentleman actually gets my gold star of the day. And the reason he gets my gold star is because he's coming to us from a hotel where he's been for many weeks. Reggie Agrawal is the CEO and founder of Cvent. Reggie, what's going on with Cvent and what are you excited about for 2021? You're on mute.
Happy to be here, and I've been staying at a hotel for about 6 weeks, so it's been interesting seeing from the inside. But my name is Reggie. I'm the CEO and founder of Cvent. We're an event and hospitality software company. We have about 4,000 employees and about 30,000 customers and about 300,000 users worldwide. In 2019, we sourced about $18 billion of group business. In 2020, it was cut in basically half. We did about 9 billion. And on the business transient side, in 19, we did about 25 billion. And this year's been cut by about 60%. The good news, people are still sourcing, and that there's still a lot of good things happening during the pandemic for people to find space. Now, of course, that's more geared towards the back half of 2021 now and in 2022. But I think the key thing is that people are still hungry to engage. They are dying, I think, as Justin said, to get together, to interact personally with people. So I think that people are definitely are just pent up demand that will really have a huge trajectory once we kind of get through the pandemic. In terms of what surprised me, there's a few things. So one, our event registrations for our event side of our business, we've actually surpassed our numbers from 19, and I think everyone knows the reason why. It's because everyone's moved to digital into virtual. And so, but I'll tell you why this is an important point, because it's really serving as a bridge. So if you think of a typical recession, when events go down and sourcing goes down because people don't have the money to spend for corporations, or people may lose their job. And then what happens is a lot of times the planners, the marketing folks, the people that are organizing the events get let go. So when you have a turn, it takes time to hire those people back to organize it. Here, what we've seen is a bridge. And what I mean by that bridge is that basically what's happening is that people are moving to digital. So planners are frankly busier than ever. And like I said, we've had more registrations than we've had historically. So we know events are going on. They're just taking place in a digital form. Now, the real question is, are they going to come back to the physical form? Are they going to be hybrid? And these are things we'll get into in a few minutes. But I am very optimistic that overall what will happen to the industry when things come back is that digital will translate to more events, even though they'll be doing different forms of events in terms of some will do it digitally, some will do it hybrid. And then of course, some will go back to physical, but I think this bridge is an important thing. The other thing is that kind of the big shift is the transformation that, all of us have had to see from our side. We've had to transform from, to a virtual. And what's interesting is the buyer's journey for our customer has changed dramatically, again, as they've adapted digital. And there's a bunch of studies like McKinsey and BCG that put out that basically said that this digital transformation, which normally would be a 7 to 10 year journey, has happened in 6 months. And so what that impact on to all of us in our industry on the digital transformation of our customers that were forced into it. And of course, we're being forced into it. And so then I think in partnering with your customers is just important to understand that. The bottom line though, is I think that once, getting together is more safe, I think you're going to actually have a bigger, stronger events and meetings industry.
Well, that's good news to hear. Thank you, Reggie. Next is one of the longest friends of AHLA, or at least her company is. And she is too. And I don't know how she does all she does, because every time I turn around, she's somewhere with a smile on her face, unfortunately telling us about how bad things are. But she's here today to tell us how things are getting better. She's a dear friend of mine in our industry, Amanda Height, president of STR. Amanda?
Thank you, Chip. So yes, I'm the president of STR. Hopefully most of you joining us today know STR, but we are the only global benchmarking and industry analytics firm serving the hospitality industry. We collect performance data on 67,000 hotels. That represents about 9 million rooms in 180 countries. So yeah, this year's, the last 10 months have not been a great story to tell. So I've had the job of trying to put a positive spin on it. What I'm looking forward to today is that we actually do have the positive spin. It's not just a spin. We get to talk about the outlook and recovery that we expect to start to the industry to undergo in 2021 and on into the next couple of years. So I'm excited that I personally am also excited to go back to live events. I love music too, Justin, but for me, I was supposed to go see To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway in March and did not get to do it. So I cannot wait until I can go back and see a Broadway show, any Broadway show, but I want to go back to Broadway. So
well, and you also
hopefully that happens in 2021.
Yeah, and you live right up the road from one of the greatest music cities in the entire world, Nashville, Tennessee. So a lot of live music there.
Absolutely.
Sean Mankey is the president and CEO of Saber. Saber has also been a longtime supporter of AHLA. So Sean, we thank you for that. And I know you're coming to us from Big D in Dallas. What are you looking forward to in 2021? And tell us what's happening at Saber.
Well, Chip, first, thanks for having me as a speaker today. I think the first thing, I've been with Saber for 5 years. I've been running the organization for 4 years. The one thing that I think is important for people to understand, because I think about Saber in a number of different ways, but we are the leading software and technology provider really for the global travel ecosystem. What I often tell people is we sit on an enormous amount of data. And if you go back actually to 2019, if you look at it from a hotelier perspective, an airline perspective, as well as the travel agency world, we transacted over $250 billion in travel transactions. If you dig into that a little bit and you look at it actually from the global distribution system, which is essentially sitting out there and taking inventory from hoteliers as well as airlines and cruise companies and airlines, we essentially have 40% of the global market share that's out there. So we see data that is happening throughout the world and what's taking place. And as you would imagine, as COVID-19 and the pandemic was essentially evolving, we could see what was happening throughout the world. Probably more specific to the audience here is really what we see in North America and sort of the penetration in North America. So we have about 55% distribution through the global distribution system. But probably just as important is the travel management companies, which essentially book the vast majority of corporate travel. We have 80% of them that are actually using our technology. So when we get into sort of the future and what's taking place, I can share with you some of the stats that we've seen as it relates to what's happening in the leisure side and what's happening on the corporate side. And another thing, and this really does get into sort of hospitality and our hospitality IT. When you look at it, the backbone is really our Synexus platform that really has CR capabilities, central reservation capabilities, as well as property management. What a lot of people don't know is that we're the largest third-party CR in the world. So again, an enormous amount of data. And when you look at that, we serve over 40,000 hoteliers around the world, resorts in 160 countries. So again, very global in nature and understanding what's happening. And you add to that on the airline side of the equation, if you look at what takes place, I sort of break it into three components for people to understand, is really the reservation system, the departure control system. So if you do a comparison to the hospitality side and you think about central reservations of CR and the property management, it's very similar to what we do on the airline side of the equation. We do it for American Airlines, we do it for JetBlue, Alaska Airlines, Hawaiian Airlines, WestJet, and I can go on and on with airlines around the world. If you go back to 2019, we processed over 700 million passengers boarded throughout the world. And you add on top of that we actually do pricing, revenue management as it relates to commercial products. And then on the operations side, people don't know that we actually do flight plan management. So when you're getting on an airplane and you see the pilots up there punching away on the computers, many of them are using our flight plan management. We do crew planning, crew scheduling, as well as load and balance. So you can see how we touch every part of the travel ecosystem and what's happening out there. And sitting there, we do see a lot of the data. And I think going to sort of what I look forward to really in 2021 Chip is it's going to be a recovery year. But I would go back to something that Reggie said, and this really gets into technology transformation and what we're seeing. Many things that were essentially being pushed prior to the pandemic are moving a lot quicker today. And, the way that I look at our organization is, yes, we're managing through what's taking place, but we're very focused on where the world is going to land in 2022 and 2023 and beyond, because there's a lot of transformation that's going to be happening on technology. So again, thanks for having me.
No, I think you're exactly right. I keep falling back to this idea, and we'll get into this in just a minute. Humans are built to engage with other humans. When did you ever think, for those who have kids, when did you ever think your kids would be just clamoring to go back to school because they wanted to be around their friends, right? That just never happened. But you take that away from them, and even kids recognize, hey, I like being around my friends and being at school a lot better than I do sitting in my room. At least most do, at least mine do. So that's a survey of 4. Let me start with Justin. You talked about the broad hotels that you have, particularly limited service, really across the country. Last year, the only thing, at least that I saw, that was kind of keeping us afloat was that leisure travel. I think most people expect that's going to be there again this year. In fact, maybe with pent-up demand, we see significant leisure travel. But still, as we talked about a moment ago, lots of concerns about business travel, meetings, and events. Coming off a year like 2020, how are you planning for 2021, and what do you think it's going to look like with respect to Apple?
It's a good question. And really, 2020 was a year to focus on fundamentals. We saw everything in our business change and really had to start from scratch in many cases, thinking about how we would staff different positions in low occupancy environments and really how to source business in an environment where we had seen a significant drop in total demand. Our portfolio of hotels had historically been heavily dependent on business transient. We estimated that roughly 75% of the total business in our hotels across our portfolio came from the business segment. And that's not inconsistent with some of the major brand families that we're associated with. Fortunately, the assets that we have broad consumer appeal. And in the depth of kind of the downturn, we were able to pivot and retarget or refocus on other demand drivers in our markets and source business in order to build back occupancy. As we moved through the year, we were able to push back into the 50s. Because of the nature of the operations at our hotels and some of the work that we did with our management companies around staffing models and things of that sort, really to keep all of our hotels open, which I think is a key differentiator. As we look into the coming year, we've already now tested operating models at various occupancy levels. And I think we have a really good game plan as to how we manage that side of our business. a tremendous amount of focus on our part on a go-forward basis is really around revenue generation, so sales and marketing, how we're utilizing different demand sources. And really, we're fortunate to have been able to maintain sales staff across most of our hotels. And really, we're focused, interestingly, a lot more on direct sales in the interim. It's something that represented a very meaningful percentage of our total business when we got into the industry 20 years ago, but over time had kind of diminished as a percentage of the total business. Now is significantly more important in an environment where we're competing for every person in every room every night. On the other side, there are revenue management challenges associated with ramping occupancy at a hotel and ensuring that we're setting the rate at the appropriate level to ensure maximum profitability. And so I think as we look to 2021, a significant amount of our focus in the coming year will be around sourcing business and building back occupancy at our hotels, and then ensuring that we do it at the right price point to maximize the potential of that business.
Before I go to Amanda, I want a quick follow-up with you, Justin. I kind of think about it this way, that no one could have prepared for a pandemic, and no one certainly wants to prepare for another one. And we all hope that starting in like June of this year, we begin another 11-year expansion, right? But let's just say that doesn't happen, and let's say we go into a normal business cycle and there's a downturn at some point. It just seems to me like we're all going to be much better prepared to handle downturns. They're not going to at least feel so tragic moving forward, because we just went through something that is so tough that it prepares us for things coming our way.
I think it will definitely change the way we look at business. I highlighted earlier, we've been in the business for 20 years. We thought we had seen everything between the post 9/11 environment and the financial recession that we've just been through in terms of kind of potential operating environments, and really, quite frankly, had refined our business strategy to address either of those two potential inevitabilities. What we saw with the COVID pandemic was elements of both combined in a really significant way. And as a result, we experienced, as I highlighted, occupancy levels much lower than we had experienced in either of the other two downturns. And really, for the first time in our 20-year history, we're faced for a period of months with an environment where we were losing money, for a short period of time at the property level and a more extended period of time at the corporate level. Given the types of assets we own, and the margins that they traditionally produce, that had never happened. And I think I highlighted a focus on fundamentals, a relook at our business. And as we've interacted with Hilton, Marriott, and Hyatt about what services and amenities look like in the future and how we should staff our hotels for maximum profitability, there's been a lot of discussion about what will change and how we'll make adjustments such that we're prepared for what might happen in the future, both good and bad. To ensure that we're able to achieve maximum profitability.
I'd like a lot of good for many years.
Absolutely.
Us too. Make up for it. Amanda, STR is synonymous clearly with hotel market data. Nobody does it better. Nobody does it like you. So I'm going to give you 3 questions here. Since you're the data expert, the data champ, 3 questions. And the first one's an easy one because you get this one all the time. When will the industry look like 2019? The second question is, I got to go to my list here. This is what happens when you go through a pandemic. This is what happens. You forget your second question. I feel like a presidential candidate from Texas a few years ago. That was a joke. When do you anticipate? Obviously, where's it going to happen first? So as we think about, by X year we're going to get back. But where is that going to happen first? Because in some places it might start happening this year. And then our urban city centers that have just been killed by this downturn and this pandemic, when will those return to the 2019 levels?
Good questions. Well, so we'll start the recovery this year, but we will not get back to 2019 levels by the end of this year. It will be driven by leisure. We saw that in the summer of 2020 and in the holiday period at the end of last year. We saw a jump in demand driven by leisure travelers and drive-to markets. So we do expect that to drive the recovery this year. We just released a new forecast. Overall for the U.S., we expect demand to be up 18% for the year, but that's only going to get us to about 76% of our 2019 demand levels. So next year we'll be at 95% of 2019 demand by the end of next year is what we're expecting. So it will be 2023 before we hit that new record demand and surpass the 19 level. So we've got a couple of years, but certainly leisure travel will drive it. We do expect some pent-up demand. We saw it this last summer during the pandemic where there were still restrictions in place. People were driving to areas of the country where they could go and have space and do things outside. We expect that to happen. And in our forecast, we're actually, we're paying attention to the vaccination rate as well as case numbers. We've been tracking demand and case numbers on a weekly basis of COVID, but now we're looking at how many Americans are getting vaccinated. The CDC guidance is to try to get 60% of the U.S. population vaccinated by June. So we feel like if we can get there, case numbers are controlled. Yes, restrictions will still be in places on a market by market basis, but we will have leisure travelers out there going to drive-to markets. Certainly airlift and the capacity around what airlift is available will be part of what plays into what markets can you get to. Unfortunately for the urban markets, they will be one of the last because there is so much dependence on the business traveler, that business transient traveler, and the group business. So the urban cities will be further into the year before they start to see any real recovery. You're talking about probably fourth quarter.
So I'm going to pose that same general question to both Reggie and Shauna. What are your forecasts looking at? Look, Reggie comes to it as the expert when it comes to events. Shauna, of course, with booking. So tell me how do your forecasts, what do you see compared to what Amanda just said? We'll start with you, Reggie.
So I think what Amanda said, I'm pretty consistent in kind of the same belief, but a couple thoughts from the group side. So I think meetings are extremely compelling because think about a typical meeting. You go there and you have two types. Let's say you go to a conference, you're meeting 30 or 40 people. So it's extremely compelling from an ROI and just building that personal interaction. And so I do think meetings become even more compelling of a trip because of the ROI. I think a couple things though. I think a lot of dependence on the policies that our government does. So here's an example. If we start mandating that people have to get the vaccine, which a lot of people are speculating that corporations are doing it, maybe if airlines do it, and we get more of an adoption of that, that could obviously have a real significant on the business side of groups and events. The other thing, of course, is just what's going on with our pandemic and just rolling out, people actually getting the shot. It's been a little rough, but it looks like the trajectory's better. So I think those two things are real impactful of when companies feel comfortable saying, let me organize an event and I actually think people will come. But from our view, look, we're seeing a lot of pickup in the back half of 21, closer till, more the July, August timeframe, and particularly more comfortable in September is what some of our data says. The smaller meetings, the regional meetings, you're seeing more pickup there than, of course, the larger conferences and conventions because people are flying internationally. But I think that, we're optimistic that the fourth quarter will be much stronger. But I think 2022, you're going to really see that rubber band effect happen because of, businesses adapting to this and then just realizing how much ROI is driven by those meetings and events.
Hey, Reggie, quick follow-up on that. Are you seeing any difference between events that are held in large urban areas compared to not held, but events that are being planned in large urban areas compared to events that are being planned in secondary and tertiary markets? Is there any difference?
I mean, right now, most of the entire market is obviously, to some degree was shut down for a long period. The urban centers got shut down even more simply because a lot of people didn't want to go into the larger cities, and then just, again, driven by just the conference center hotels. A lot of them were were shut down more because of the cost of maintaining them and just the size of the groups that they needed to have those hotels. They're so dependent on group. But I think, again, probably the biggest drivers is if it's a domestic event, and again, smaller events. Those are the ones that will first rebound first for sure. And then you'll start getting into the larger events, and then the more larger events where people are flying from, around the US, or frankly from around the world. So I think that will be your kind of more driven than whether it's urban or let's say suburban or other areas, tier 2, tier 3 cities. That will be the bigger driver.
That makes a lot of sense. So a 500 person event is probably more likely this year than a 5,000 person event, right?
Yeah, and combined with, are they flying internationally? Are
Right.
are there people picking up from regions where people can drive 3 hours? But look, one thing I'll say, Chip, is that people are feeling much more comfortable flying. They're feeling much more comfortable starting to interact. I'm just, when I'm out and about at the hotel, it's interesting to see the pattern of behavior over 6 weeks, and just, people are enjoying themselves. The hotel that I'm at, I'm at a Marriott. They seem like they're getting a lot of occupancy. I've been talking to the GM, a guy named Roger, and he's been telling me about their occupancy every week. It's just interesting to see. So I think I actually am more optimistic that things will come back faster than a lot of people forecast, because that demand is just there, and we just got to get these shots going, and optimism. And I think that will happen at the end of Q2. Just once the government gets that stuff situated, I think that you will start seeing a lot more pickup. And I'm optimistic, especially after staying at a hotel and seeing thousands of people coming back and just seeing how they're interacting, as opposed to being, frankly, in my bubble before this at my house and just not really going into the office. And it's just interesting to see that.
Well, I can promise you, if I were at the Marriott you're at, because I know which one you're at, I'd be enjoying myself as well. Sean, quickly, look, again, this is why I was so excited about this panel. You guys are the experts in bookings. What are you seeing? Is there any pattern emerging telling us what 2021 is going to look like?
Yeah, Chip, and I think this is for the entire audience today. And I'm a former economist, analyst at heart, so I've done a lot of forecasting in my life, and I spend a lot of time talking with people around the world. And to be rather candid, forecasting at this time is really difficult, and it's more directional in nature is what it boils down to, because I've seen numerous revisions to what's taking place. Because as everybody's talked about, we think about traveler confidence. We have to understand the travel restrictions. Again, we just had additional travel restrictions put in place relative to being tested, being quarantined, coming into the United States. And that's one thing that we have been impacted by, and this on a global basis as well as the US, is what's happening. And I think you're going to continue to see that in what's happening. You also have to look at capacity. I look at it relative to, hoteliers that are operating, properties that are still operating. I look at it relative to the airline capacity. So when people start talking about recovery, and you may be very dependent on air traffic, how much capacity is actually going to be in there returning to where it was before? And those are really important things. And I think it's important to understand sort of, where we're coming from. And I'll just share some data with you that sort of looks backwards. And I do have to be careful. We're a publicly traded company. We haven't shared some of the information, but I'll share some information. And I think it's important when you look at it from the hospitality perspective. The worst month really on a global perspective is bookings were down 117% in March of 2020. And what ends up happening, right, is people aren't booking, and those that are operating know that there was a number of cancellations that took place. So you come off of that, right? In the North American marketplace, the peak was about 114% at that time. What you saw, and this gets into the recovery that you're talking about, Chip, is we saw things progressing, and this was on a global basis. And Amanda was talking about this, is we were seeing a real peak in the summertime until we saw cases begin to move up again. We saw bookings fall off from an airline perspective. We saw bookings fall off from the hospitality perspective. What's interesting, when we got to the September timeframe, we actually saw that bookings were down in the North American marketplace right around 48-50%. On the global perspective, we saw them down about 68%. But then again, you started to see a spike take place, specifically in Europe and restrictions. So when I think about the future going forward, we got to be very cognizant of the restrictions, the cases that are taking place. But what you are finding is that pent-up demand. We've seen a lot of those same things on the airline booking side of the equation relative to a level of confidence taking place. Bookings are there, very much on the leisure side. And again, if you sort of dig into the data, one thing that we're capable of doing, I was talking about this relative to leisure versus corporate. as we saw, recovery was truly on the leisure side. So if you look at the OTA bookings, they were probably tracking 15 to 20 points ahead of where corporate bookings were. And I'm talking in a range of corporate bookings being down in the 85 to 90% range throughout, the data tracking period that we've been sharing. And then you look at OTAs, which is really leisure at the end of the day, was probably about 15 points better. So when you look at that, a lot of data there. But again, I would tell people to think about, the air travel side, understand, if you're dependent upon that, understand the importance of it, because there's a lot of information that continues to essentially move around.
All right, this is for Justin and Reggie and Sean. Real quickly, look, there's one airline out there, I won't mention them, they're based out of Dallas, that forever marketed themselves as the ones where you don't have any change or cancellation fees. I actually happen to like that airline. During this pandemic, everyone else has joined that path, right? And now, Reggie, in your space, you're having to work with, not you, but venues having to work with people on cancellations. Justin, what a challenge this has been. I want to ask all three of you, have the changes in cancellations, which are geared towards encouraging consumers back into the marketplace for travel, are those temporary or are those permanent? And I'm going to go in reverse order, Sean, and then Reggie, and then Justin.
Yeah, I think when you look at this, and I do believe that airline that you were talking about has had an advantage relative to, potentially a level of loyalty because of the flexibility that's there. And, when you look at it, I think everybody's fighting for essentially the traveler at the end of the day. And it's going to be one relative to not only essentially the restrictions or the freedom that they provide, but how are products actually being catered to what they want. So to answer your question, Chip, I think we're going to continue to see that it's going to be very consumer focused and that you're going to see that there's flexibility in the marketplace because we do have a recovery taking place. And I think it'll become the norm at the end of the day.
Reggie, what about you, especially in the event space?
Yeah, so I'll talk more about the hotel side on the group space. So here's a couple thoughts. One is that when the pandemic hit, we saw a lot of hotels, just still trying to figure out what was going on. So they were more strict on their policies, and you saw a lot of friction. But then I think hotels started to become more flexible, started focusing on a customer more from a longer term basis, because a lot of our customers are corporate, so they're going to be around. And I think they were starting to become much more flexible in accommodating the uncertainty that meeting planners had. And so then I think that started to become better. And part of it was being forced because planners were like, I'm not sure if I'm going to do my event. And as we all remember, it's hard to think back, but if you look 7-8 months ago, we were hoping that things would turn around by third quarter. Then we said fourth. Things were just still at such in flux and were so fluid. So I think that there was frankly a great response from the hotels, building those relationships and being accommodating. I'll tell you what makes it complicated as we go further, longer term, is when you do events, which I'll talk about, in a little bit, but about hybrid events. And when you start having an event, you're not sure if someone's going to attend in person or are they going to attend virtually. And when you have that choice, it increases the complexity to forecast. And so then I think you're going to have a little bit of grinding of the gears there for a while until people can start saying, hey, if I have 1,000 people that normally come to my event, will I get more people? Will I get less live? How many will go, virtually? And so I think that will make it a little more difficult. But I think that people will find that the hotels and the corporate and the customers will find that middle ground to accommodate that uncertainty, but that will make it a little bit more difficult to forecast. And I think hotels need to just kind of be a little bit more flexible in trying to figure that out. So that's kind of what I'm seeing going forward. But I think that flexibility will be key, certainly in the transition period, and then maybe a little bit more as people transition to understanding hybrid events and what that means for their attendees.
Justin, to you, flexibility, is it here to stay?
Permanent is a word that I think it gets overused in our space, and we've heard it related to this or online meetings or all of these other things. And what I've found is that, we make adjustments based on the situation that we're in at any point in time. And what we'd seen early, 20 years ago, it was easy to cancel hotel rooms. Over the past several years, we'd seen an increase in cancellation fees and timing for cancellation as hoteliers determined in the environment that they needed to be able to plan, for who might be there as they they put together, labor and other elements of their business. If you look at what we've been through over the past little bit, what we've seen, I think, is a necessary accommodation. People have experienced restrictions that are sudden. People have gotten sick and couldn't travel as a result. And so for us to be more liberal in the near term, related to cancellation fees, I think is an important consideration of, the environment that we're in, our accommodation related to the environment that we're in. I anticipate that will continue so long as we are in a low occupancy environment, as there will be competitive pressures that will keep us from putting more strict policies in place. But over time, my expectation is that we move back to something that's rational and works for both parties. Ultimately, as owners and operators of hotels, we need to be able to plan our business. And absent that ability, there are inefficiencies created, and that costs us and ultimately consumers to some extent from an experience standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're switching gears here. We're going to talk about the topic that I think is among the most important on somehow determining when will we be back, at least from the hotel industry, from a revenue standpoint, and that is business travel. I'm going to turn this over to Justin to lead the line of questioning here, but I'm going to start with a question for Justin. When are you seeing business travel, or what do you see throughout 2021 with respect to business travel? Because I saw in the summer of 2020, there was some business travel. We shouldn't say it went to zero. It might have looked a little different. It wasn't urban business travel, but what are you seeing for 2021 business travel?
Well, obviously, as you highlighted, we saw significant deterioration of business travel in total as a category for the industry in 2020. But it wasn't universal. And interestingly, we saw a significant differentiation between our large corporate accounts, especially in financial services and big tech, versus our smaller local clients. While everybody shut down in kind of the March, April timeframe, as the year progressed, we saw project business. We saw business from online retailers who were building out distribution facilities. We had space travel business at some of our hotels. A lot of project-specific business, and then local smaller companies, sales people who were traveling as well. I think our expectation is that moving through 2021, that smaller local business traveler and elements of business travel will continue, and that while we tend to think of business travel as this large category, we'll see different things play out in different markets and different regions of the country, depending on the primary industry that's driving business transient demand. I think we'll see differentiation between some of the suburban markets where people are more likely to go back into the office in the near term, and the urban markets, which will drive kind of this staggered recovery that will be a little bit uneven across the country. We're looking at a portfolio of just under 250 hotels, and I know Amanda's looking at far more hotels than we are. And so I'd ask her the same question. And then I've been watching the chat box, and there are a number of people who also want to know about how rate comes back and how that comes back relative to occupancies at hotels. So those two questions for you, Amanda. When does business come back?
Yeah.
And then how does that play in terms of the pace of recovery for rate versus occupancy?
Right. Well, and that's a great question, because certainly how business we think about business transient travelers and then the group business, where you've got companies booking big group meetings. Those are needed by hoteliers to be able to really drive the rate, especially in the leisure transient segment. So you need that kind of block of business that's there on your books that you can count on, that that's coming in. But I agree with what you said, Justin. The business traveler, yes, there's some business travel happening out there. And the problem with the forecast at this point, it's so different across the country, in every market, kind of sub-market. at the hotel level, it can be such a different story. So, someone's asking about profitability in the chat. Like, there are hotels today that are profitable and more profitable than they were in 19. So it's such a different story depending on where you sit. But overall, as we look at our forecast for the industry, what we are seeing is corporations, corporate travel policies in place is to restrict most of their corporate travel right now for the first quarter and second quarter, and then start to ease those restrictions and spend more on corporate travel in the third and fourth quarter. So that's what's playing into our demand recovery that we are looking for. And then on the group side, those meetings that are smaller meetings, we expect in the second quarter to see more of those hybrid events that Reggie was talking about. We have a large event at STR in August. It will be hybrid. That's, we will have an in-person portion, but we know that local restrictions will play into who can travel, when they can travel, and we're going to feel the effects of those restrictions throughout the course of 2021. And it's really hard to predict exactly where that will impact more than others, because they do vary by day and it depends on case numbers and vaccination levels. From a rate perspective, so we tempered our rate forecast for 2021 just a little. We expect ADR to end up just below $108 for the year, which is just over a 4% increase. What I would say is, I think there will be some challenges as we see this pent-up demand start coming out in the industry. We know what will happen in trying to still share from other customers is that there usually is tension there with rate, and that's how, in some cases in revenue management, people will try to look to cut rate to try to draw business in when people do start moving about more freely. That's our concern about rate, that could be there. But I'll say the really positive view on rate that gives me, I think there's some upside risk on our rate forecast, that rates held up much better as compared to 2019 performance than demand did. So as you look at our ADR as a portion of index back to 2019, we had much more stability and integrity in ADR than we did demand.
That's incredibly helpful. And interestingly, Reggie, I'm going to pivot to you because we talked about, or Amanda touched a little bit on the compression that we need in certain markets, and obviously that has impact on rate. And historically, group has been, a significant driver of compression in markets that's enabled us to create a base upon which we could build. You highlighted earlier that you had expectations that would come back over time. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the impact of hybrid events, right, on total occupancy and compression, and then how hoteliers who may be participating today can think about doing those events well, taking into consideration that they'll have some people on site in person and others joining virtually.
Yeah, so Justin, I think it's a great question. And I'm going to give a story just to show you as a case study that Amanda mentioned at STR, their customer conference. So we had our customer conference in 19. We did it in Vegas. We had about 4,500 people. And in 2020, we obviously went virtual. And historically, like I mentioned, we had 4,500 people. And when we went virtual, we were kind of shocked, but we had our event in August of 2020. We had almost about 47,000 people. We like 10 or 12x'd it, which was just shocking. And now a couple things learned. One is the amount of intensity there was way less because people weren't as engaged as long. It was a much shorter amount. When we have our customer conference, normally we'd have 3-4 days. People are frankly interacting from breakfast all the way to the end of the night because we have a lot of activities in the evening and parties, and people really got to bond more. So there's a lot of differences. But talking about the numbers, when you go from 4,500 to let's say 45,000, what does that mean? So I think there's a couple implications. One, all planners are going to be thinking, hey, now I went from one arrow in my quiver, which is kind of a physical event, to now I can do it, physically, I can do it virtually, I can do, again, both of them combined, which is hybrid, which I think most people do on the mid to larger events. And so, what I think that will happen, I'm going to tell you first, mid and long term. So I think midterm, meaning let's say this year, you're not going to necessarily get back to the attendee account depending on when you do event, but let's just call it the back half. You're not going to get necessarily to the number, and you probably unlikely get to the same number you had in 2019. But by 2022, we believe that there'll be a swing. And let me explain to you why. All of a sudden, I'll use our conference as an example. We went from engaging with 4,500 customers. Now we engage with 45,000. We think we're going to take some of those 45,000, and when things come back, we're going to convert them to come to our in-person. So even though normally we'd have, let's say, 5,000 people just with the growth, or 5,200 by growing 10% a year, we think that we could accelerate that growth massively in 22 because we'll engage with those people. So when you get back to the hybrid, there's a big benefit. We call it the golden age of events. And I think that there'll be a positive because you'll be able to get those people that engage virtually with a lower cost to engage, because you have to fly somewhere. It's cheaper to get in and view the material, let's call it. Now you're going to be able to convince a certain percentage to come in physically. So we think that we can maybe have 6,000 or 7,000 that go to our event. So we'll accelerate that growth when things come back. That's one trend. In terms of hotels, I think hotels need to really shift the way they're thinking. I think a lot of them are doing a lot of really neat things and embracing it. But a couple things. One, hybrid events are more complex. Let's use, for example, a typical planner now that's had a year journey of going from doing a certain type of event to just pounding themselves learning virtual. And so the first thing is, of course, safety of the event. But then the big thing is getting tech ready to support your planners. And what I mean by that isn't just Wi-Fi bandwidth. It's a whole different thought process that people are going to start choosing hotels from a group view because of who can broadcast the best to their virtual attendees. So if we did an event and let's say I have 500 that physically come, I might have 3,000 of virtual. That audience is super important. So when I'm making the decision of who to pick, it isn't just about the 500. Some would argue it's how do you optimize the experience of the 3,000 or 2,000 or whatever it is. And it generally is not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. It won't be 500 there and 500 hybrid. Maybe the longer term, it could be that, but I think in the first few years, it's going to certainly be a higher amount virtual, but ultimately that will again lead to more people in person. But I think as hotels, navigate this, they have to remember that they are there as partners. And a lot of the planners are going to actually look to the hotels for leadership and telling them, how do we do a hybrid event? So you might need a studio, for example. So you're doing your live event, but then you need a place where they can have a studio so they can, broadcast stuff virtually to those other 2,000 attendees. And so I think the hotels that are able to navigate that with dedicated studios, maybe a different room layout. I know some properties are saying, hey, we're going to have Zoom rooms. These are the great things that I think hotels need to do to accommodate, because it is a permanent shift. This is not a temporary shift. It's a permanent shift to these hybrid events, especially for the medium and long term. For the mid and large events. And I think that hotels need to and understand that is the shift for their customers and do what they can to embrace that hybrid event. And I think it's a great place to show leadership, to really build that customer loyalty.
I appreciate that, and actually, I'm encouraged. I hadn't thought of the angle, that we might see coming out of this hybrid event environment an increase in engagement that ultimately drives incremental room nights. I think what you're highlighting is an important thing, and that's that we've seen a lot of evolution over the last year. But as we come out of this, we'll continue to see evolution in the way we do our business, and that will impact. Group, it will impact the way we attract business transient and certainly leisure. I know if any bandwidth providers are on this call right now, they should be ecstatic because we didn't talk about it earlier, but you're highlighting the need for bandwidth for large groups, certainly to the extent people are working and playing at the same time, which is something we've talked about as a theme. We're going to need increased bandwidth at the property. Verizon, Comcast, all of those folks should be ecstatic. And while we're on technology, Sean, you had mentioned something in your opening remarks, and I'd love to come back to that because you talked about some of the changes you were excited about happening in your organization during the pandemic, and some of the more rapid changes that have happened probably as a result. And I had read elsewhere that your organization had been focusing attention on AI, as part of the technology investment. I'd love to hear kind of what you're looking at broadly in terms of how your technology is evolving as a result of the pandemic. And then specifically, I'm curious about how that investment may be accelerating your progress in AI.
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I'd love to talk about it. And it actually goes into your comment on revenue management, because I'll talk about how the world of, I think, revenue management is evolving in the pandemic, and we're seeing it in different places. I think two things are playing out. Just if I look at sort of technology stacks, and some of this was happening pre-pandemic, but I think it's actually coming to the forefront right now. And I'll speak more specifically probably of the CR Center reservation and the property management, because they're very integrated relative to, I think, where the world wants to go in creating unique offers and capabilities. And what we're finding is that, a lot of customers, which would be, large enterprise hoteliers as well as the independent hoteliers around the world, are really looking at their in-house systems, they're looking at their third-party systems, and they're really looking at from the capability of having robust and flexible essentially capabilities to meet future demand. And with that, you have to think about where the world is evolving. I'll come to the AI in a second. The other thing that has come to the forefront, and I would say we're seeing this in all sectors, is that technology budgets for anybody in the travel ecosystem have been cut, and because of what's taking place. And we're of the belief that you're going to see this for future years, because it's going to take time to recover. And in doing that, as we look at it, it's actually driving, technology decisions on where do you want to go, which leads into sort of the AI piece of the equation. And, the one thing that we announced at the back half of last year, we ended up doing a deal with Google as well as Google on the GCP side of the equation. And we announced the Saber Travel AI, which is the first of its kind, really proprietary technology that's using Google and Google capabilities for us to begin to use that in what's happening. And if you think about it, we look at the world relative to retailing, distribution, and fulfillment. And what I mean by that is it's our responsibility to work with hoteliers, work with airlines, and how do you create new offers for the future? And in doing that, you can't look at the way offers were created historically. And at the same time, this is where you're going to use a lot of data. You're going to use AI to essentially create new offers that are out there. And with that, you're going to have to look at what is the infrastructure and what's the capacity to be able to do that compute. And when I took over the organization, we only had about 5% of our compute on the cloud. Today, we're approaching 70% of our compute on the cloud. That gives us a capability of essentially doing an enormous amount of stuff that's out there. So when we think about it, it's incorporating that you get really seamless from the perspective of how are you creating offers, how are you distributing those offers. And for much of your audience, it does get into the customer experience when you get into the property itself. And how do you make sure that there's a seamless nature associated with that? Because where people want to drive is how do I create unique offers? And this is where you got to be very careful is part of the brand is one selling a unique offer, but probably more importantly, it's delivering that unique offer at the end of the day. And we believe technology is going to be the big driver for this.
Well, Chip, I have about 100 follow-up questions, but I see we're coming close to the end. So I'm going to turn the time over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
I feel like an idiot. I mean, I've done 1,000 of these, I think, and I still don't know to unmute myself. I feel in the same, Justin. It's like this has been the fastest hour, and we can spend many more with these folks. But we promised an hour, so we're going to try to nail it there. I have exactly, looks like almost 2 minutes. You've got to answer this in 30 seconds or less. What is the one change or the one technology that we've seen during the pandemic that stays with us? And Justin, I'll start with you.
Okay, quick answer because I want to hear from the others, but combined job responsibilities. I think one of the things that will be a lasting effect of the pandemic is a redrafting of traditional job responsibilities such that we're combining traditional responsibilities and utilizing people to perform multiple tasks. I think there are productivity benefits to doing that and job satisfaction benefits to doing that as well. The new workers want jobs that are more challenging and provide exposure to more of the operations of the hotel. And I think that's something we found to be incredibly valuable in the current environment and will last afterwards.
Amanda, what lasts out of this?
So the technology to enable the hybrid events, I totally agree with the commentary that Reggie and Justin had around, it is about you. It will allow you to engage more people when we can be back in person. But for someone like STR who has an annual event, who had already sold out and had a waiting list, we had already been thinking about how do we engage more people when you can't be in person. So for a company like ours, like to be able to have the technology to do hybrid now, it's something that we had needed for several years. And for the hotels to take a leadership role in that and help us be able to meet the needs is really exciting.
Reggie?
Man, I stole what I was going to say. No, I'm just joking, but I would say digitization of assets. So everything's moving to digitization. Again, remember, in 3 to 6 months, we got what took 7 to 10 years. Hotels have to think smarter because event planners are getting smarter and more technology savvy. So therefore, the hotels do, and things like from people are going to source online. They're going to look for virtual tours. They're going to expect to be able to book digitally without even necessarily interacting with salespeople because they'll get the information they need. And at the end with the hybrid, to make sure that you realize that that's going to be a bigger driver than almost anything we've seen. And because everything's moving digital. So just realize that hotels, famous quote by the CEO of GE, said that we're no longer an industrial company, we're a technology company. Hotels aren't probably that level, but they have to start thinking like they're a tech company because that's the way your planners and your group customers are thinking.
John, last word. What stays with us?
Yeah, I think everybody's hitting on the same thing because I truly believe it's in this digital transformation and what's taking place. I think what we have seen, and Reggie's been talking about it, and we're doing it right now on this Zoom call, or many of us are on Teams calls. You're going to find this balance going forward, but I think you're going to have this hyper focus on technology transformation, and how do you differentiate yourselves moving forward.
Panel, you are the best. Thank you. I'd love to do this again sometime. This was a fascinating hour. But you know what? If we didn't have anybody watching us, it would just be us kind of sitting around talking. And that's good enough for me. But I'm glad that those of you who watched and participated in this were able to do so. We thank you for being part of the forum. Thank you to our sponsors who make all of this really available to us. And they've, the sponsors that you saw, we talked about, those that are represented here, we could not do this without them. All of this information, by the way, ultimately finds its way to the AHLA website. So please do that. And we got the next one coming up. I can't tell you who the speaker is yet. It is a surprise. We do know that Eli Malouf will be joining us, the CEO of IHG for the Americas. And we'll have a very special guest speaker along with him. So hopefully that whets your appetite a little bit. If this show right here that we just are finishing isn't enough to keep you coming back to the forum, I don't know. I'm not sure what else we can do. Again, panelists, thank you so much. You see on your screen the next two events. Appreciate you being with us. And until next time, so long, everybody.